First, I'm gonna address definitions, like what should we actually even call this whole thing. Then we are gonna look at what has been happening for the past maybe 25 years. And then finally, how that will reflect in the future. But let's start with the definitions. Ontology is the study of meanings. And it has practical applications outside of philosophy, most notably in information architecture. So, and this is something that designers quite often dismiss, the importance of what we actually call things, because meanings are subjective, they are culturally relatable, and they are something that is needed for when people interact with each other or with devices, whether they are services or products. So first, let's make a small thought play here. Could someone define me what a sandwich is? Now let's imagine that I'm working in some kind of restaurant and I don't know what sandwich is, and you have to describe me what is a sandwich, and based on those instructions I will offer you something, and whether that is a sandwich or not will define whether the thing was successful or not. So,
one piece of bread and butter.
Okay.
Ice cream sandwich.
So now so there has to be one piece of bread and then butter.
Well, if you go to Subway, then it's 2 pieces of bread and then 32.
So if I would give you what she's describing, would that not be a sandwich?
It would be a sandwich.
It would be a sandwich.
Is it a baguette or a bun?
Oh, that's...
It doesn't have to have bread.
It doesn't have to be bread.
No, ice cream sandwich.
Is an ice cream sandwich a sandwich?
That's good.
Would Kauri be happy if I would give you an ice cream sandwich? Is that what you wanted?
No, that's not the definition for a sandwich. A sandwich for me, because an ice cream sandwich includes ice cream.
Okay.
Something between 2 other things.
So if I put 2 pizzas like this, would that be a sandwich?
If there's something between, yeah.
Okay.
I like that sandwich.
What about lasagna? You have essentially wheat and some sauce. Is that a sandwich? Maybe. So if you're not able to define what a sandwich is, even though we inherently know what a sandwich is, it is very likely that things like what is augmented reality or virtual reality, defining these things is also really difficult. I wish I could tell you who to attribute this. This is a great way to kind of show like how we can define a sandwich. So we have on the axis we have ingredients, and on the other one we have the structure. And from this we can get all different kind of sandwiches. And depending on your view on what sandwiches are, there might be disagreement on whether that definition is correct. So it's really important that as a community, if we're going to work together, we at least understand these different variables and can kind of evaluate how they change. And this is a huge problem in design still. We have all this work like user experience, customer experience, interaction design, product design, service design, design thinking, human-centered design, user-centered design, human-computer interaction, experience design, business design. And there are passionate and very heated arguments, especially on LinkedIn, saying that these are 2 different, completely different things, even though thematically they are really, really similar. And this divides people. Like our team is not user experience team, it's a customer experience team, and therefore you cannot work together or something other like that. And when you cannot define something, you cannot measure it. And if you cannot measure anything, then it is really likely that getting funding is going to be really difficult. So now, as we are kind of early stage of this whole thing, do everything you can to not to add noise to the signal, but rather try to find the things that are similar rather than different. And many of these terms are originally marketing terms, like design thinking is popularized by IDEO. So they are not really based on, how would I say, like scientific process, and therefore they may be not designed for fruitful discussion. So we already see that we have this virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, expanded reality, visual haptic reality, blended space, computer media reality. And when you look at how people describe this online, you can see they are really similar. And I'm not the smartest guy in the room, which is benefit for you because then I have to kind of simple down things and then I can re-educate them forward. So I started thinking like, what are the kind of different aspects of the whole thing that we are now talking about? And well, it seems that we have a user who can see things or hear things that other people can't. So maybe it's some kind of hallucination. But these are made by Louis Wayne, a famous English artist who was suffering psychosis in later of his career. But of course, there's a difference. Like he cannot really choose when he sees these visions. So there has to be an aspect of control, like when we go to these new worlds. So maybe it's like drugs, because you can choose when you take drugs. But still, it's not a shared experience. Like you cannot invite other people to that specifically same trip as you have. So from this, I conclude that the thing that we are talking about has three aspects. So it's some kind of reality that is easily controllable and participatable. That's a new word. There's maybe like 5,000 entries on Google, with varying degree of immersion. So we have control, participation, and immersion. And let's see how this taxonomy works. So here we have two axes, the control and participation, and then the color talks about the level of immersion, meaning blue is the most immersive and the red is not so immersive. And by immersive, I mean how much it takes you away from the physical world that you are living in. I'm not saying that this is the best possible topology, but this is the one that I'm proposing for the sake of this talk. So a good example of a product which doesn't really have a lot of user control and where other people cannot participate would be the 360 YouTube videos. Because of the good immersion, it seems to be a relatively working product. Then why the Google Glass failed, terrible control. You cannot really participate there, and the immersion was also pretty bad because the screen was so small. And here we have like scary games, like the Resident Evil that you have for PlayStation VR. A lot of control, but it's a single-player experience right now, but very immersive. And on the right upper corner, we have VR chat, where everybody can participate. It's quite immersive, and there's a lot of control within the environment. Here we have HoloLens, where you are having this kind of teleportation call and so forth. So maybe this kind of helps us to kind of understand like where these different experiences fall in the future. Okay. So this was kind of the first part of the speech, so kind of starting with the definitions. Next, let's look at like where will it go from here? Of course, we are always interested about the future. And the history doesn't repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. And when we are talking about history, of course, we have to have some kind of time scale. And 2007, the iPhone was introduced. And because I think this is a crucial point in development of mobile internet, let's call it the year zero. This is where the time begins in the sake of mobile internet. So 41 years before iPhone, we had Captain Kirk was using this communicator, and the then executive at Motorola saw this, and he really thought like we have to make this into reality. So then year 23 before iPhone, the first commercial mobile phone was introduced in the United States, the Motorola TAC 8000X. And actually the prototype of this looked exactly like the Kirk's model, but it would still take a few years before we would have the clamshell phones. So this is kind of the ancient history of mobile development. Around the same time, there was actually first virtual reality headsets and touch screens, like what you can actually touch with fingers. But then, 14 years before iPhone, we had the first PDA, Apple Newton. 10 years before iPhone, we had the first mobile web browser, Nokia 9000. And only 6 years before iPhone, we get the mobile internet in color. So that's the Ericsson T68. And during the same year, the iPod was launched. Then we got P800, which is also Sony Ericsson phone. I think I actually own this one, and I think Kauri might have also owned this. It was at least in your slides.
Sure.
And I think that's first a bit like, you could see like what iPhone could be with this model. It had a touch screen, and it had a lot of those PDA functionalities. It didn't have Wi-Fi, and of course during that time there was no 3G, so the connectivity was quite limited. But the models that BlackBerry introduced during that time, they actually did have Wi-Fi. So using email and that kind of stuff became much easier. Then 2 years before iPhone, we get the first 3G phones. And then in 2007, we finally get the first iPhone. Okay, so this is past 14 years. So what about the time? When iPhone launched, it didn't have these features. Like, it didn't have copy and paste, it didn't have App Store, it didn't have support for Flash, still doesn't. It doesn't have removable battery, still doesn't. External storage, still doesn't. And it didn't have 3G. So it wasn't the most advanced phone in the market. Yet, for some reason, we think it's good enough to be kind of the messiah of mobile internet. So what did it have? It had a new kind of keyboard. It was predictive. It was really accurate. It really shifted the paradigm. Like, everybody thought like you have to have a physical keyboard, but that was good enough for people to ditch the physical ones. It had a glass screen which was noticeably clearer than the plastic ones. It had YouTube with Wi-Fi, which was a huge thing back then. You could actually look mobile video. Then it had an MP3 player. Of course, many other devices at that time had too, but the iPod was definitely the king of MP3 players at the time. It had a really good mobile browser, which was already familiar with for the users, Safari. It had the pinch and different kind of gestures, which were invented in the labs, but now definitely implemented to the product. And then it also had a gyroscope, so it could sense in which orientation you were using a device. So these were the kind of the key elements of what made the first iPhone such a revolutionary product. But keep in mind, they were not the all features that were available at the time, but really specific ones. So what has happened ever since? So last year we got iPhone 10, and that was the year 10 in our way of counting time. And Steve Wozniak said that it's basically the same phone as iPhone 7, and which was the same phone as iPhone 6, and which was the same phone as iPhone 5. So if we compare this with the earlier picture, we can say that there hasn't been that much of a change with the device itself. Sure, it's faster and the screen is bigger, but fundamentally it hasn't changed that much. There has been some key innovations, like the year 1 we got App Store, year 3 we got FaceTime, year 4 we got Siri. Now, of course, we have all kinds of digital assistants. Year 6 we got iOS 7, which introduced a flat design, so skeuomorphism was ditched. Year 7 was Apple Pay. But still, these things, interesting in their own right, we cannot say that they are revolutionary in a way that iPhone itself was when it was introduced. But using iPhone 10 is a very different experience than using the first iPhone. And why is that? Well, many other things have happened during this time. So year 2 we had Spotify mobile and WhatsApp. Year 3 we had Instagram. Year 4, we had Uber, WeChat, which introduced its own kind of app store ecosystem, especially in China. We got Snapchat. Year 5, we got Tinder. Not interesting because of the maybe the utility it has, but the user experience and the interactions it has introduced have been super influential. Then year 7 we got Google Cardboard. This is also the time when I did my first commercial VR concepts. And it's also the year when people used mobile internet more than desktop internet in the world. And then year 9 we got Pokemon Go. I think arguably the breakthrough AR app. And last year we got a Face app, so we use machine learning to augment how we look. So a lot of interesting things have happened in this point. And now if we put it in the big perspective and look what has happening with these reality devices, it's a different looking image. Like 12 years before iPhone, there was Virtual Boy, which was a console by Nintendo. Wasn't really a commercial success. Around the same time, Sega was also trying to bring their own VR goggles, which look really much alike with the Oculus Rift these days, but people were puking in arcades, so it wasn't maybe the time yet. And it was quite quiet in the between. But then year 6 we got the dev kit for Oculus, the Google Glass, and a couple of years after that we got the HTC Vive, the commercial version of that, and the HoloLens. And now the question is like, what do these correspond with this, the mobile internet timeline? What do these, like, I don't think that the kind of iPhone of AR and VR has been invented yet. I think this is up for debate, which maybe we do in round tables, but I think we are somewhere like 3 years before the iPhone of this new reality, which would hint that the level of experience that we have now with iPhone 10 would be about 13 to 14 years off from now, not counting that maybe the development is quicker than it is. But that's about the time the whole thing would take. So the question is like, what is the new, like the reality? Is it the Vario device? Like, what would it have to have? And if we think about like what made iPhone, so maybe we should ask ourselves like, what would be the equivalent of YouTube in this kind of space? Or what would be the equivalent of iPod or the new way of typing on the device? And these are the things that we should be probably mindful. I think this gives an interesting lens to like think about the features that will make the change. And maybe if you think about these goggles here, they are by Vario, the enhanced resolution, are they the iPhone features or are they maybe the ones that have been already kind of invented, which will not make a difference? I think that takes a lot of critical studying. Okay, so let's say that we will reach the iReality, let's say in 3 to 4 years. And of course, then there will be a new rush, like how to get from the iReality to the iReality X, so the equivalent of iPhone X. Okay. Basically, we already have the kind of tools and processes for this in user-centered design. So after the paradigm shift has happened, like here would be the old cool Nokia phones and here would be the iPhone, we can use the user-centered design methods to kind of climb the mountain where the level of product is the highest possible that within that space can be reached. And for that, we need hipsters who think about the desirability, then we need the hackers who think about the technical feasibility, and the hustlers who think about the financial viability. This is really standard stuff. These are the kind of teams that you are going to use to accelerate that progress once the iReality has been invented. This is something I also want to emphasize. So we started with definitions. So I really hope that whoever comes up with the breakthrough product, those names and conventions will then define the whole landscape, which makes it easier for us together to develop them further. So at the core, we have names. Then around that, we have how we arrange them towards in relation to each other, and finally we had the choreography, like how do we actually interact with these new devices and so forth. Then when we are doing the development work, it's really important that you understand the difference between attitudes, or what people say, and behaviors, what people do. So if you ask people like what kind of experiences they want, it doesn't necessarily reflect the kind of experiences that they are going to use. Famous example, Henry Ford said that people would be asking him not an automobile, but rather a faster horse. So as an entrepreneur or designer, you have to be kind of able to see the difference between what people say and what people do. Testing will not change, like probably people are going to use agile methods, combining the best aspects of others and building the experience. The 5 quality components of usability will change. These are the things you use to quantify the experience of whatever that reality is. So the learnability, how quickly it takes for a new user to orient in there. The efficiency, how quickly they are able to perform the tasks that have been assigned to them. Memorability, if they don't use it for a while, how quickly can they reorient themselves, what kind of errors they do make, and finally the satisfaction. And satisfaction, maybe we're going to introduce some new variables there. For example, now about 3% of us have some level of color blindness, but with VR, it is estimated that even like 60 or 70% of women have VR sickness, and for men it's about 30%. So maybe we will have more specific, platform-specific usability metrics for this before they are resolved. The usability heuristics will not change. They are still based on the cognitive functions as biological beings as we are, so they are still really relevant. And then to answer the question, like why do people order beer in virtual worlds? And this has something to do with affordances. So affordances are kind of aspects, they are either perceived or they are hidden, but they tell us like what a thing can do. If we see a shoe, it's obviously one of the affordances to wear it and use it to protect your soles. But a hidden affordance would be that you can actually use your shoe to open a wine bottle. So when we are making new products and services, we need easy to understand affordances to orient the user within the space. And in case of VR chat, everybody already knows how to behave in a bar. So having those same analogies within that space is important, not for the sake of, because nobody can get drunk from virtual beer, but it still signifies people like how to behave in that space. So it's likely that, especially now when we are kind of early stage, there will be a lot of these kind of analogies from the world. And this has been the case with the mobile phones as well. First there was skeuomorphic design, really underlining like what is the real world analogy to this. And then when people learn to use them, they slowly drop down the things that are not necessary, because it's really expensive to make this photorealistic stuff. But that's something that will kind of solve itself with time. And it has happened many times before. This is Microsoft Bob. It came with, it was sold with Windows 3.1, really expensive. And this was Microsoft's vision about like how, like they thought that this will kind of change or replace Windows 3.1, but people were already quite literate with desktop, so this could have been maybe better for children. But you access the calendar by clicking the calendar, and you access your notepad by clicking the notepad, and so forth. So the future VR and AR environments are something like this, but hopefully they don't perform as terribly as Microsoft Bob did. And then really quickly, so you will be using design patterns. So they are reusable solution to a common design problem. A good example, like you don't design a login screen to an app. You just copy it the way that other people use it. I don't suggest you to come up with new design patterns. Rather, let them kind of emerge. Like they will organically emerge, and then just see like what other people are doing, what is working. If you want, you can document them, of course, but just be mindful that when they start emerging. The other thing is human interface guidelines, so a set of platform-specific recommendations. This is by Meta, which is also making this augmented reality set. So they have their own idea, like how you should design for this device. Same thing with Apple Watch or Android and so forth. These are not always based on scientific research or even experimentation, so take them with a grain of salt, but be also mindful that many developers and designers are using those. So they might be the ones that they are offering the users, hence users are already familiar with these conventions. And then we have design languages, which are kind of this even bigger overarching themes. And I think Microsoft is the first one to address this for the AR and VR space. So they have this Fluent design system, which was introduced last year, where they add things like motion and depth to their recommendations. Google's material design is another example of this, which also has the depth, but it's not maybe being taken as far as this one. Okay, and conventions are really difficult to change, so don't try to find them. Like everybody has a keyboard that is terribly designed. Like literally QWERTY is designed to be as slow as to type as English language as possible. So some things we just have to live with. So the final question is like, and this is, now we're going to go to the science fiction part, like what would be the iReality X then look like? Well, if you take the same components that the iPhone X has, it's probably something like this. Like people will be dating through these new technologies. There will be assistance. We will be not maybe taking taxis with this one, but making transactions, and we will be altering how we look and how our friends look. And some of those things are actually quite scary. Like your spouse is maybe able to choose who they spend time with, like physically, and if you think about like games, like modding community, like if you think what are the most popular mods in Skyrim, like they are skins, like people want to be surrounded with attractive people. It could be that maybe in 50 years this is, a reality. Technically wise, definitely it could be. Yeah. So that's my 5 cents for the topic.
Questions? There has to be some.
Yeah.
So interesting talk. Yeah. At least there.
Do you know why it's so big difference in nausea between men and women? Is there any analogy to that?
Can you also tell for everybody what she was asking?
Yeah, so why there's a gender difference between the amount of nausea people get when using VR. To be honest, I do not know why that is the case. The same thing is not only with VR sickness, but also with motion sickness.
Okay.
So it's not like VR is not being discriminating, like it seems to be inherently a biological thing. There might be a reason for this, like it might be studied why this is. But for example, I do get really VR sick, and I used to be in the Navy. So, but I do know that for me, ginger works better than any prescription medicine. This was also confirmed by Mythbusters. So maybe if you want to make a startup now, it would be maybe the VR branded ginger tablets could be a good business. But it really works. It really works. And this of course poses a big question, like, can these be used for public services if like a lot of population cannot handle them? Because in Photoshop we have these tools where we can simulate people with color blindness, and they are relatively easy to overcome. But if you really feel sick, that's a big problem.
In the Mayo Clinic in the US, they've been using patches to stimulate the balance organs and then align the experience in VR with the balance organs.
Okay.
So that you actually feel like you're moving in a certain direction.
Okay.
But the disadvantage of that is if you're standing and it's actually affecting you, then you will actually fall.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny to see when astronauts come back from the International Space Station and they spend there like a year, then they have water bottle and they just drop it. So there will be maybe like, it's really interesting to see when we start spending more time there, like how will it affect the kind of real world.
And I think that's one reason why the design guidelines will be extremely important here, because it's not only about making things easy to use, but there's this whole new range of like you can design things that make people sick. It's then all about how do you design something, or you can design things or things so that people don't get sick. Well, at least that most people don't get sick, and I think that's why they are the kind of the guidelines will be even more important. It's not only about that it's then easy to use.
Yeah.
Is there anything, like I saw how you went through the history and it included the adoption of the iPhone, but that was really, we already had the phone before that, we just kind of made a better phone. But with the immersive technology that we have with 3D, like, is there going to be some restriction to how it's adopted? Or segmentation in the market that is different than how it's phone?
I think, let's say that we would have extremely immersive experience in that. I'd say that we humans are kind of attuned, like as humans, like to interact with that world, as long as we get it to resemble what we already have here. So I don't think that there necessarily will be that much of a kind of obstacle for adopting this. I think quite opposite. This might be something that people with like disabilities, let's say elderly people that are not able to move from their beds, and this might be the way from them really intuitively start to use, let's say, go to different museums around the world and so forth. So I think this has an opportunity to be a really easy technology to adapt with.
One more.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested because I see VR as a media device. It's like there was radio, there was TV, there's a phone, there's a computer. What if you're comparing it to do you think that you could compare it to, let's say, TV instead of a phone? It's more of a, for now, it's more of a fun device. Most people play games or socialize with it.
Yeah, so that's why I was thinking about the way to define the whole thing. Like maybe only in hindsight we can actually tell like which part of us relevant. Like, is it an entertainment product or is it a productivity product? I try not to lock it at this point if possible, but as we can see, the most mature experiences are entertainment related. At the same time, I'm sure, like especially people who do maintenance work would be really interesting to see the possibilities of augmented reality to help them with their work.
One more. There's one more. Then we have
That's
to
the
move on.
answer to the initial question.
Why do people? Yeah, so affordances. So let's say, for example, I don't drink alcohol. So if I would go to the VR bar, I probably wouldn't take beer. So my choice to take water tells something. So it's also about like self-expression. But in that screenshot, they were actually throwing those bottles and trying to make flips. So there are many other like affordances to things that the ones that we think are the most obvious one, like in this case, to get intoxicated.
But also affordances work on the flip side. So for example, when Pokemon Go came out, people were stepping on in front of cars. So how does the real world also make affordances for people in VR and AR?
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff is also like, it's not just inside the device that you make.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions.